two more kickoff times were announced for the football season. You have the East Tennessee State and the Georgia kickoff times, both at 3:30 in Neyland Stadium. Jordan, your initial thoughts on a 3:30 kickoff time for both of those games?
Well, I'll say that I definitely like it more than noon kickoff. As someone that's kind of stays up later during the weekends and stuff on Friday nights, I like to sleep in a little bit. So I'm happier that it's not a noon kickoff. And I was a little shocked too that ETSU wasn't a noon kickoff. I thought that was pretty interesting. But Georgia, I don't know really what to expect with it yet. I think it's nice that it's happening during that time. So, like you can enjoy the night after, like in Knoxville, because there's a lot to offer there. But it might be a little bit of a hot game. So everyone that's going to the game might need to bring some sunscreen. Because it's 3:30 in September. I would imagine that's pretty hot.
It can get hot out there in September, those 3:30 games. I would imagine. I'm not trying to think. Have I been out there in the heat for one of those? I remember being on the field for the Pittsburgh game in 2022. That was a very hot game. And even the noon games are really hot too in September. They can get pretty brutal, but just looking at the week 2 schedule, you actually have two other games that are Group of 5 and SEC matchups. You get Texas and San Jose State, and then Texas A&M and Utah State, both in that window. Tennessee and East Tennessee State, that is an ESPN Plus game, by the way. So not a game you can catch on network television, which does kind of stink, but it's also East Tennessee State. And you're at the point in the season too where you've got all these non-conference games going on, so it's not as if you're going to have a game just on every channel available to you. And really, there's a handful of good matchups that weekend. And that second weekend, you've got the first SEC game actually kicks off at the same time as Tennessee and East Tennessee State that week. You've got Ole Miss playing Kentucky, which could be interesting. You would think Ole Miss would win that game, but at the same time, we saw what happened down in Knoxford last year, and it was not what most of us expected. And honestly, probably the most bizarre-looking result in all of SEC football last year, with a 4-8 Kentucky team going on the road and beating Ole Miss at its place. So you have that game, which kicks off at the same time. Additionally, at 3:30, you have Kansas playing Missouri on ESPN2. That game is at Missouri, which those two teams are not projecting to do super well this year, I don't think, but two teams that really hate each other historically. At least Mizzou really hates Kansas. I mean, their students chant bleep KU every single time they play Mr. Brightside at sporting events. They hate Kansas more than anybody in the SEC. And then in the night window, you've got Arizona State playing Mississippi State, Michigan and Oklahoma, which should be a really interesting game, and then Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech. So those are the major matchups Tennessee is competing with. And 3:30, it's interesting with the way ESPN is treating it, because obviously that was CBS's prime window. They love the 3:30 window, still do with the Big Ten. But with ESPN, it kind of feels like they'll stick some big games at noon just to grab your attention. They'll put some decent games in the 3:30 window. They might have one really good game on ABC, but outside of that, you're going to have some not so great games in that 3:30 window. And those are kind of the ones that have gone on SEC Network over the years when CBS had that big slot. And then they're going to want their best stuff at night. So they kind of feel similarly to the 3:30 window as I do. I know your favorite kickoff and my favorite kickoffs too, Jordan, are the night ones. I mean, nobody can disagree with that. But, and I know it's a little bit of a hot take, but I do think there is something to be said for noon kickoffs potentially being better than the 3:30s. Just from a fan's perspective, you get to see more of other games, I would say, if you're watching the noon game as opposed to the 3:30 game, or if you're going to it, I should say. So that's my thoughts on the East Tennessee State kickoff at 3:30.
I mean, that is a good point. I didn't consider that beforehand. I mean, because I like watching all sorts of college games. Like whenever Saturday goes on, I want to watch it all day long. And it does kind of suck when there's big games going on and Tennessee's playing. And then you kind of have to flip back and forth. Like you want to keep up with what Tennessee's doing, but then like it might be a long drive on defense. And then you're like, oh, well, Ohio State's playing like Penn State during that day. And it's like, of course, you want to check into a big game like that. So, yeah, I never really considered that before. But, yeah.
Trying to check other major games in week 2. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find very many, but you've got, well, of course, you got the Cyhawk game. That is a noon game over on Fox, which no surprises there. And then outside of that, you've got most of the non-conference games that I mentioned already. Now, of course, the Georgia game I mentioned is also a 3:30 game. And that one has not been played at any time other than 3:30, with the exception of that 2019 game with the cursed Brian Maurer graphic in Neyland Stadium. Of course, you guys know the one I'm talking about with Brian Maurer and Peyton Manning. But I'm interested to see what happens in that game. That's the Checker Neyland game. And both of these teams have got somewhat new quarterbacks. Obviously, Gunnar Stockton played a little bit at the end of the year last year, but this is his first season really being thrown into the fire. And the same thing goes for Tennessee's quarterback, whoever that may be at this point, of the three guys. So we'll find out quickly. And of course, Tennessee plays Syracuse the first week of the season. So I think that will also be a big test. But for Georgia, that's their first big test of the year. Their only marquee non-conference game is Georgia Tech at the very end of the season, which a lot of times, honestly, is not very marquee. They typically play that game at noon. And more often than not, with the exception of last year, it's a blowout.
Yeah, that last year's game was really crazy. One of the best games of the season, in my opinion. But it'll be interesting to see how the Tennessee and Georgia game ends up going. There's so much uncertainty right now. It'd be hard to like really dive in deep with the game. But I think quarterbacks are going to be a big button topic for that game for sure. And I guess we'll find out more as Tennessee plays Syracuse and ETSU beforehand. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because I feel like this is like the year, if any, that Tennessee would have a chance to beat Georgia if everything works out perfectly or like the way that Tennessee fans and others hope that it'll go. But yeah, I mean, it'll be a fun game to watch for sure. And I like that the Georgia game is earlier in the year too, because you don't really want to stress about missing the playoffs and everything. Not saying that like Tennessee's going to go to the playoffs, but I mean, if they're winning lots of games towards the beginning of the year and they have to play Georgia towards the end, not going to be, it's going to be a little bit stressful. And that's kind of how I feel with the Florida game this year.
Yeah. Although the weird thing with the Florida game is that is generally early in the season and it's not this year. But just thinking about some of the recent history against Georgia that Tennessee's had in Knoxville, it's not been competitive outside of the last time that Tennessee beat Georgia in Knoxville. Like it's all been blowouts really in both places, although Tennessee was more competitive in that 2022 and 2024 game than they've ever been against Georgia in Neyland Stadium since Butch Jones's last season on the job, or even the last time he beat Georgia, I should mention, because his last season was that 41-0 game that you could say is one of the worst, if not the very worst loss in Tennessee football history, although Georgia State also exists. So,
yeah.
But yeah, the quarterback matchup is one that makes me say Tennessee, because right now I don't think Tennessee beats Georgia, but I think you at least give yourself a little bit more of a shot just with some of the uncertainty this early on in the season. And I think that could be beneficial for Tennessee. And that may be a part of the reason why this game is in the 3:30 window. Because looking at what is in the 7:30 window that night, it is Florida and LSU. And neither of those teams, I would say, is necessarily better than Georgia on paper, but they know what they got at quarterback, so that should make for a more interesting game. At least I would think.
Yeah, plus Florida and LSU, they've had some interesting games in the past. So, I mean, it makes sense that they would push that one off later as
Yeah.
well.
It's also been 9 years since Florida last won at LSU.
Yeah, definitely it's tough.
Yeah, well, here's what's wild is that was a makeup game because of a hurricane that they had to play out there in Baton Rouge back in 2016. It's what gave Florida the East over Tennessee, but Tennessee also went on to lose to Vanderbilt, so it's not as if it would really matter in the end. But that second Saturday of September, you got a lot of really good games that weekend. A couple that have not been announced yet for kickoff times. You got Arkansas playing Ole Miss in Oxford, which Ole Miss shouldn't necessarily be better this year, so that should make for a pretty competitive matchup. Vanderbilt at South Carolina has also not been announced just yet, which, again, we'll see with Vanderbilt and South Carolina if that's a competitive game. South Carolina's kind of dominated them of late. You got at least, okay, so the other two, you got two big non-conference games. You got Wisconsin playing Alabama in Tuscaloosa. That's a noon game, but the kickoff time has not been announced yet. I would guess that game is probably on Fox and that Bama will probably win big. And then at 7:30 on NBC that night, you get the Texas A&M and Notre Dame rematch in South Bend, which, of course, the game going to South Bend will favor Notre Dame a little bit, but I also think Notre Dame probably takes a step back this year, and you should get a really fun competitive matchup between those two. So third Saturday of the football season is going to be a pretty fun one. And obviously it does kind of stink that Georgia Tennessee is not a night game, but I don't necessarily fault the decision to put Florida LSU in that window over it.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, you listed off a lot of pretty big games there. I mean, and who knows? I mean, like if Tennessee and Georgia start off hot out of the gate, like maybe it'll get more attention surrounding it, but like, stuck at that 3:30 window, that's not going to change. But I'm really excited for that matchup, just based on how the first two games go. I guess I'm just excited to see how the season starts and who ends up being the starting quarterback, because I think that's going to be the biggest question for a while now.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll get plenty of attention. There's no doubt about that, because I don't know if CBS has announced its 3:30 game for that week. I know they announced their first two, and they were nothing burgers, from what I remember. If I can pull these up here, because they of course love that 3:30 window. So you've got Nevada playing Penn State in week 1. Like what is that matchup? Honestly. So you have that one, and then the following week you have Oklahoma State playing Oregon. And Oklahoma State, usually I would say that's a great matchup. Oklahoma State fell off a cliff last year in conference play, went 3-9 after winning, I think, all of their non-conference games. It was funny how the Big 12 worked last year. They had, what did they have? Like their worst teams in going into the season wound up being the best ones, while the teams everybody projected to be really good ended up being the very worst, which is not how you would expect. And then in week 3, okay, so here's what Tennessee is competing with in the 3:30 slot: USC and Purdue. 1-11 Purdue from last season is in their little CBS window with Big Ten. CBS really took a step down once it stopped that deal with the SEC. This is what it could have had this year: Georgia and Tennessee, or LSU and Florida. That's a great choice to have for your 3:30 window. But no, you just decided to go with the Big Ten, and you're stuck with this crap instead. USC went 7-6 last season. They'll have a new quarterback, and Purdue. I'm sure Barry Odom will get them back on track because the bottom of the Big Ten is weak. Let's just call it like it is. But CBS could have had Georgia and Tennessee if it really wanted to, but it decided not to renew the contract. So here we are.
Yeah, Purdue and USC. I mean, I know Purdue's had some upsets in the past. Like I was watching that game live when they put the whooping on Ohio State, and I was shocked watching that game. But I mean, like
it's Purdue, once in a blue moon.
Yeah, they like every couple of years they'll do some crazy upset. I mean, they pulled the upset off against Tennessee, even though that was pretty a controversial game.
They also they went 9-4 that season too. I don't know how big of an upset it was necessarily.
Definitely not like how the Ohio State game was for sure.